Mercedes expected to have the upper hand there because of the characteristics of the car. We expected Mercedes to have the upper hand, but the margin of that advantage was absolutely huge, and that's going to be pretty worrying for Ferrari, particularly with the fact that Mercedes have won 3 of the last 4 races. The Silverstone advantage will not carry to Hungary, certainly not in that magnitude. But Ben, what do you reckon? If you were Mercedes, you'd be thinking, yeah, actually, we're potentially on a decisive upswing here. And if we can go to Hungary and win there, then it's not game over, but it's going to be proof that the pendulum is swinging against Ferrari, surely.
Yeah, Toto Wolff has said that he wants to see really what happens in Hungary, because that will be the acid test of how much improvement Mercedes have made in terms of unlocking the potential of their own car. We know they had a difficult start to the season. Pre-season testing didn't go so well. They've had a few difficulties getting the setup right and working the tyres properly on the W8. They're going to have fewer problems at high-speed tracks like Silverstone, where you can load the tyres up properly. Obviously, they can exploit the engine advantage they still have over the competition that little bit more. But Hungary will be one of those street-style tracks using the softest tyre compounds. With the rival cars from Ferrari and Red Bull, their characteristics more suiting that track naturally. So if Mercedes still has a dominant advantage in Hungary, they'll know that they've really turned the corner and this championship will be theirs to lose.
It's quite a nice comparison, actually. You've got tracks almost at either end of the spectrum in terms of the characteristics, etc. So I guess Ferrari will be pretty worried. There was a point in the race, I did the race report on Autosport.com and Autosport Mag. There was a period of 6 laps in the build-up to the first pit stops where Hamilton lent on it, and he pulled away from Raikkonen at second a lap, which is huge. So what do you make of it, Lawrence? Obviously, the one factor you have to question there is if that was Kimi Raikkonen performing at kind of his normal level, was it Vettel being under par, and therefore could a Vettel getting the best out of the car have been 3 tenths up the road, 4 tenths up the road in terms of lap time, and therefore mitigated the gap a bit? Do we think it was an honest reflection?
I think it's difficult really to put any firm answer on that. We'll have to wait and see, like you said, to Hungary. I think the fact that the gap was so big in terms of the size is worrying for Ferrari, and you could see when Seb was talking about it after the race, he was clearly concerned about the magnitude of the gap. I think he was talking about qualifying and saying it was a game changer, the difference in the pace between Mercedes and Ferrari. So I think there is concern within Ferrari, despite the improvement that they've made this season.
I think Ferrari should probably temper those fears a little bit with the fact that we talk a lot about track characteristics suiting certain teams and cars and through the seasons, and we know the rules have changed a lot this year, so perhaps some of the prior knowledge doesn't apply. But Ferrari have struggled at Silverstone recently. Last year they weren't very competitive. It was one of their worst circuits, and Raikkonen was also more competitive there than Vettel.
Well, it's certainly not a Vettel track. He's only got a couple of poles and 1 win there. It's obviously a terrible record, but you know, it's not a track that he gets the best out of himself at. So I can. The kind of probability is there was maybe a little bit more on the table, certainly for him.
Yeah, I would say so, and it's one of Raikkonen's stronger tracks. So you could probably take Ferrari's gap to Mercedes as fairly representative. A lot, I think, is still in the engine. That's what really Vettel's referring to in terms of Mercedes' game-changing qualifying pace. They have this Q3 mode that Ferrari still can't match. Vettel believes the Ferrari's a stronger car in the corners. Obviously, Silverstone has a lot of corners too, but as Christian Horner was pointing out, with the nature of the cars now, it's turned some corners that previously weren't flat out into flat out corners, which extends the straights. And of course, with these hybrid engines recovering energy and having a limited amount of use per lap in certain aspects, that means having the most efficient and most powerful engine is going to be a bigger advantage than on other types of track. And that's why Mercedes, I think, is so far ahead on other circuits. It won't be such a problem. And if Ferrari can find more from the engine, which we understand they're working on and quite hard, then they should be able to close that gap to Mercedes. And
of course, the Ferrari isn't the strongest car in the fastest corners, is it? So there's a lot of things that were against it, which is why I think it's the gap will have been exaggerated, certainly, but it's kind of where that pendulum swings back to, if you want to take the gap as a second, as it was at times in the race, which is probably a bit exaggerated. But if the pendulum swings back 7 tenths for track characteristics, that's still a 3 tenths difference, which is much bigger than it was at the start of the season. So that's the interesting question, I guess, for Ferrari. And it's a test for Ferrari, isn't it, Lawrence? Because we've seen Ferrari working much better this year. There have been times in the past few years where, well, last year, obviously 2015 was a strong year, where there seemed to be quite a bit of finger pointing, a little bit of politics. And when things go wrong, sometimes the reaction isn't always the best. So I guess this is quite a nice test for Ferrari, isn't it, to see whether the style of team we've seen this year is able to sustain that when things are going not so well, and look at itself, really understand where, if anywhere, they may or may not be falling behind on development, and just make sure they can all pull together in the right direction.
I think you're right. I think it is the first big test for them. I think so far they seem to have done a pretty good job of making the most of what they've got. I think this year we've talked about the harmony and the atmosphere in the team and all that kind of stuff, and that, you know, that all seems to be really good. Seb and Kimi obviously get on very well, and in terms of car development, I think, you know, they've kept up reasonably well with Mercedes this year in a scenario where they haven't really been in that position the last couple of years. So it will be interesting to see how they get on. A lot of people are talking about this development race this year and just the importance of making sure you allocate your resources correctly. So we'll just have to wait and see whether they've done that.